Welcome to Strain on the Game, the podcast that reveals what it really takes to keep elite footballers performing at the highest level. I'm Stephen Warnock, former Premier League player, joined by physical performance expert Adrian Lamb. From training ground truths to the financial impact of fitness, we discuss the often overlooked challenges behind the beautiful game. Welcome to another episode of Strain on the Game with me, Stephen Warnock, and Adrian Lamb. And today we are delighted to have Dr Steve McNally with us. For over 16 years, he has led football medicine and science at Manchester United, helping to deliver 5 Premier Leagues, a Champions League, a Club World Cup. He's a Fabrice Muamba Award recipient, and since 2023, he is a performance support director to the PGMO. And that is not with an L anymore, as the doc will let us know, supporting England's elite referees from Old Trafford to VAR HQ. Doc, it's absolutely great to have you with us. Thank you very much for joining us. I'm just going to give our listeners and our viewers a little bit of a brief overview as to how we know each other. So you were actually my club doctor at Liverpool Academy way back when I actually broke my leg 3 times and you oversaw all 3 breaks. Is that roughly about that, right?
Roughly about right, yeah. It is a long time ago, and thanks for the invitation. Delighted to help you out with this. It was 1998 when the academy started. If you remember, moved up from Melwood to Kirby, where the first team now are at the other end.
Yeah.
And I was lucky enough to be appointed as the first ever academy doctor for Liverpool in that brand new facility. And I think I just arrived a few weeks after you had your first break. I think it was.
That's right, yeah.
Was it with Tottenham?
September. Yeah, Tottenham away, September. Yeah.
Yeah, so I got to know you then very quickly, obviously, because you're one of my first patients, along with Richie Partridge. I think he was injured at the time.
He did his ACL, didn't he? So you had a leg break and an ACL just to ease you in gently into the academy life of being a doctor.
So it was full on with yourself, and obviously we had a lot to sort of go through together with the physiotherapy team and the specialists looking after you. And then, unfortunately, the same thing happened again the following year, didn't it? On your comeback, I think that was at Leeds. That one.
It was, yeah.
Different place and different management, obviously. So it was an example, I think, of how you manage the same patient sometimes with the same problem in different ways to hopefully get a better result. No, we worked very closely together from those first days in professional football for me, which was a baptism of fire, as you say, but a good one.
Oh, it certainly was, yeah. Yeah. Can you just give us a little bit of a brief overview of sort of how your career moved on from Liverpool and what you've done since then?
Yeah, well, just before that, I think, and I always give them a mention, I got into football initially in semi-professional level at Marine in Crosby, Liverpool. So that was when I was a GP in Bootle, and that was a real apprenticeship in football at better than grassroots level it was then. They were close to the conference, and I think that was the opening into Liverpool. I think I had a little bit of a name locally on the circuit, and I think that's how the club got wind of me and managed to appoint me to that job. But I spent 8 years at Liverpool, which were fantastic. I think, as you know, then the academy staff were brilliant. Steve Harway, Hugh McCauley, Dave Shannon, Barry Whitbread, loads and loads of them. And for me, that was a great introduction into the professional world of football, albeit at youth level. So I had 8 years there, and during that time I was invited by the FA to help out with their England youth teams. So I worked with 16s, 17s, 18s, 19s at various stages. And I think that then put me in, a decent position, if you like, when the Manchester United first team job came up, which was, I think, a bit of a surprise. And I was surprised to get a call to say, would I fancy coming to meet Sir Alex Ferguson and have a chat about taking on that role?
Wow.
So, yeah, did that. My life turned around in an instant. Spent best part of 17 years there, almost every day, until I took on this new role as performance support director at PGMO 2.5 years ago now. So, yeah, that's my pathway in football.
Yeah, and how have you found it over the years, sort of the development of your job. So I was talking about, obviously, to people that you were coming on, and I think obviously there's a lot of feeling that we all know what a GP does in his job day to day, but what's the role of a GP within a football club? How do you, like, what is your role? Do you look after all the departments of the medical staff? Do you employ them? How does that look to you?
Yeah, I think it's really evolved, as you say. I think an awful lot of it still is general practice. You're dealing with human beings, albeit generally young, fit, and generally healthy players. So there's not a lot of serious illness, but those things have cropped up during my career, and you've still got to be able to spot those, if you like, and respond to them. But I think club doctors initially, their role was as the GP, if you like, the private GP, often helping out with the families and the children and the wider staff, and then providing match day emergency medical cover, at games, to make sure that, any serious injury situations that the physio perhaps wasn't fully equipped to deal with were better handled. But then since then, it's evolved into so much more, I think, particularly in terms of elite level sports injury management. So sports medicine in terms of performance preparation, injury prevention, that type of thing, but also occupational medicine, I think, has a large part to play in football teams now. You're constantly assessing risk and managing risk for the players. So it's a real hybrid role that encompasses, 3 or 4 areas of medical practice, and you've got to be able to wear different hats at different times depending on each scenario.
Lammy, how did you find it being, or was a doctor at a club your sort of boss all the time, or what was your relationship with the doctor?
Yeah, I mean, in my sort of initial years in the game, the doctor kind of dropped in on a Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, and there were a local GP who was employed by the club on a part-time basis, and then that role then evolved into full-time sports medicine. And generally speaking, for me as fitness coach or performance department, yeah, the club doctor then sort of became head of medical services, and fitness sort of was a direct line underneath that. So towards the latter stages, and more recently, and now, you would generally have the club doctor would be the director or the head of medical services, and then there'd be a straight line down to the head physiotherapist and the head fitness coach, and then the branches would drop off below that in terms of specialized roles within that, assistant physiotherapists, strength and conditioning coaches, etc.
How importantly are your relationships then between you, Doc, between the physios and yourself?
Yeah, it's massively important. When I started, the physio was the head honcho.
Really?
Physio did everything. The trainer, they used to call him, didn't he, back in days before your time?
Yeah.
So the physio was the fitness coach, the stand-in doc, if you like, if the doc wasn't around, and had the closest link generally with the manager. And physios often moved with managers at that time. But as Adrian said, around about 2010, 11, when I was at Man United, the club asked me to oversee the whole department. So that's when I became head of football medicine and science. Sports science was becoming embedded in the club, not just in terms of strength and conditioning, but exercise physiology, nutrition, psychology, that type of stuff. And then the physios also sort of came under my wing. So I took on much more of a governance role, overseeing practice. I clearly wasn't going to direct a fitness coach, in terms of sports science practice. That's their niche expertise, and same with physiotherapy. But if you get the right people and the right mix together, you all have respect for each other, whoever's at the head of that wider team. And that's, I think, when successful support teams have really gelled and been able to contribute most effectively, to the overall team performance objectives.
So still within that role of when you were at Manchester United, how did you sort of ensure that collaboration and that communication, and that everybody pulling in the same direction happened? Did you have daily meetings, or how did you sort of structure that from being from the perspective of being the head of department?
Yeah, it changed again over the years. I think you do live with each other most of the time. You know, you're on the road a lot of the time. You're in early morning, so you're having breakfast, lunch, sometimes evening meal together. So a lot of the communication and collaboration was informal, and that was particularly in Sir Alex's days. I think he very much had an informal family feel where everybody was in the canteen together. There was constant cross communication. But then over the years, as teams got bigger, you had to organise that into more formal organised meetings. But when I started there, my office was next door to the physio's office, and we'd go in there and we'd go through everything before the players came in. One or two senior players would often drop in, and Mr. Neville being the prime example, sort of outlining his day, and then we'd tell him what he was really going to do, you know. So it was, but that was great. Again, that would be like an hour-long exchange of challenging each other, but in a healthy way.
Yeah.
And I think from then, you know, a representative of our team would go to the coaching staff or manager or assistant manager, whoever was the contact point, and relay the message we'd all agreed on, if you like. So the individual staff members couldn't get picked off by one coach or another manager or a player even. So we worked it that way, and that just changed in format slightly over the years, depending on management styles, what the managers wanted, the numbers of staff we had, and we went from having everybody in a meeting to maybe only the heads of areas, back to everybody in a meeting again, so they had to say. But yeah, communication is vital, and there's so many contact points in a day that you can't really avoid passing on information that's relevant.
Yeah. Doc, how did you find it? Because you've just talked about, obviously, a big name there, Gary Neville, but you've gone from academy football into arguably one of the biggest football clubs in world football. How did you deal with that pressure of knowing that effectively you're the head of making sure that these players are performing at the highest level, making sure that you're getting them on the pitch fit enough, and making sure that they're performing?
Yeah, it was a big step up. Obviously, we still had some big characters at Liverpool Academy as well, you know, and a few of them had got in the first team. I'd had a little taste of helping Mark Waller out with first team now and then. I've, you know, done a few transfer medicals, so I've been exposed to some aspects of it, but not the day-to-day decisions of, you know, is somebody playing or not, or training or not at that level. I had really good help from the staff who were already at United. There's experienced physiotherapists there. Rob Swire was there. Neil Huff, who you know as well from Academy, had been there a couple of years. So there were a few familiar faces. There was some players I'd known from the England youth setup, like Tom Eaton, who's still there now. He's still there, who helped me bed in. But equally, the manager empowered me straight away and communicated that to his players. And the group of players we had then were good guys. You know, they were really good human beings who welcomed me and helped me to bed in, if you like. So, you know, you get the challenges, you know, for a newbie, usual new things, but
typical,
But they were, you know, well-intentioned, well-meaning, and I think once they've sussed you out, you know, as a person, I think they know that they'll test your knowledge, and hopefully my knowledge was good enough to bring it to that environment. And as I say, it was such a family feel, and the academy was very much mixed in with the first team then as well. So there's people I knew from United's academy that you were bumping into every day. So it was a couple of games in, and you knew you were there, if you like.
Yeah, I can imagine. You just touched on it there about the getting involved in medicals. Just for anyone who doesn't know the process of a medical, I've been through a few medicals myself. I'm sure both of you have played a part in a medical at some point. How does that look, and what's the process behind it? Do you get a phone call from the manager, or is it the board? How does that work?
For me, it was always the board. Yeah, I reported to the board, even though operationally I was working with the manager every day, and technically the manager's your boss operationally. The structure at United was that I reported to the chief executive or the football director in later years when that happened. And in some cases, you'd have prior warning that someone was on the radar. So we'd do what I used to call a medical scouting report. So you try and find out a bit of information from injury databases that you knew were out there. And whilst you didn't rely on them as being 100% accurate, you knew from media stories and things like that what you might be facing. But at other times, a transfer could be dropped on you within a few hours' notice. So, yeah, it started off with an instruction from the board, a time frame, if you like, that you've got to work with, which was often quite tight. But equally, I could say, look, with this one, I'm going to need X amount of time and therefore need a little bit longer. So don't expect a recommendation within 4 hours. You know, if deadline day, you sometimes have to do that, but
Yeah.
generally you try and get somebody in well before you had those pressures. Then I think you could start to communicate formally with the selling club if that had been agreed between the two clubs, and you may then be clear to contact a colleague, you know, at the club the player was departing from, possibly even get some records sent over so you had some previous history. And that was a question of just waiting for the player to arrive. And obviously you went through a process of introductions, physical examination, clinical history, blood tests. We try and get all those done quite quickly, cardiac tests done quickly, because they're going to be the key influences, if you like, in your recommendation. And then we had a little bit more time while those investigations were being processed to look in a more functional way. So a sports scientist would get involved, fitness coach might get involved, doing some standardized tests that we had as a battery in the gym. We sometimes did some field tests depending on the background of the player, if you like, what he had just been doing. Sometimes it wasn't appropriate. They've just come from a game the night before, or potentially had a game if we didn't buy them in the near future. And then in later years, we generally do a battery of MRI scans and imaging, depending on, again, what we were looking at. So it could be, we could reel one off in about 6 hours in terms of information capture, and then wait for information to come back before making the recommendation. Sometimes it went into a second day where you'd say, look, hang fire a minute, we need to do something else in a little bit more detail.
When you were ever on the road, Doc, and suddenly a player gets dropped on, we want to sign this player, and you might be in a hotel somewhere because there's a game that night. How do you manage that situation? Do you sort of get other people involved and have imaging sort of remotely, and then get the images sent to you so you can have a look at them, or how does that work?
Yeah. With the team I had a couple of backup doctors, if you like, who could step in to do the clinical history, the physical examination. We had a team of physiotherapists, not all travelled. Physios are all very competent at assessing musculoskeletal issues, more so than me, probably, in terms of fine detail. And equally, there's always a sports scientist on the team that had been trained up to deliver the battery of tests. So we had a backup team. I could link in remotely from wherever. We were lucky to have imaging facilities on site since 2013, but equally many hospital contacts that we could use in clinics. And again, as transfers got more and more complex at times, we ended up sometimes doing medicals remotely, even in other countries, where I might be in another country and they might be in England, or I might be in England and we were dealing with facilities elsewhere. But we still made the decision. We'd use trusted individuals to do some hands-on stuff for us, and then it's still down to me to make the overall recommendation based on the information we gathered.
How difficult is that to take to the board then, Doc? So say if you've got a player and you don't think he's fit enough, or you think he might have issues down the line, how much of a big decision is that to go to the board, or how brave do you have to be able to do that? And did they ever refuse your recommendation, or was it always, no, the doctor's right?
Yeah, I don't think you have to be brave. You just have to be open and honest about what information you've got. There were certain medicals where I would say I don't think I've got enough information to make a real valid judgment on this, but based on what I have, this is my risk assessment, if you like. Medicals aren't a pass fail. It's something I've always said in the press. You always hear about somebody passing a medical or occasionally failing a medical. It's not like a train driver or a pilot where there's a set of criteria specified by the health and safety executive that you've got to tick off. There's one or two things where clearly it would be a bar to playing professional football, but usually if a player's been playing elsewhere, those things aren't an issue. So it's all a risk assessment based on what the club or the board or the manager is expecting of that player in terms of productivity, the contract length, the contract value. And then it's my job to risk assess whether they're likely to meet the demands of that contract. And if not, what mitigations might have to be put in place in terms of the contract arrangements, or how might we mitigate against some of the things that we have picked up to hopefully get the best value out of that player. Occasionally you might say, yeah, there was one occasion I can remember where I said the information on this player isn't enough, and there was some conflicting information coming from advisors close to the selling club, and it was more a question of mistrusting the deal rather than a problem with the player. The club didn't sign the player. He went on to have a decentish career at a high level, so it wasn't a medical issue with the player. But I think the club hopefully did the right decision by not entering into a deal that might have cost them a lot of money, where there was some misinformation coming from the selling side. So
interesting.
That's business. Yeah, it's not something I don't get involved in, but just make the point that no, the information there is not what we've picked up.
Yeah. Listen, we can't talk about your time at Manchester United without talking about Sir Alex Ferguson, arguably one of the most successful managers in world football. And just describe your relationship with him. How did that work, and how did you find it?
I have to say, completely fantastic. Honestly, I know he perhaps has a reputation in some quarters as being, of a fiery temperament. I would say most of the time the complete opposite. There were times when that was necessary and it came out. But from the first meeting I had with him, which was the sort of informal interview, I think I was in his office for about an hour and a half, talking about almost everything except football. Talked about family life, where my relatives came from. I think our grandfathers used to work in Glasgow in one of the shipyards. So it was all about life, family, understanding your values, your principles. He was very interested in the non-league football stuff, not so much about Liverpool as you might guess, but
I wonder why.
Interested in my work with semi-professional team and how that went, and never really talked about high-end football until the sort of last 5 minutes or so of the interview. It was more about getting to know me as a person. So I immediately felt comfortable. And yeah, when I came in, and this was the same for anybody that entrusted with a senior role or any role, whether you're the kit man or in canteen, that was your area, that was your domain, and you had complete autonomy to do what you saw fit, as long as he was informed as to what you were doing and why you were doing it, and then he would back you. Even if things didn't sometimes quite go right, he would make sure that you were backed, if you like, in front of the team, the club, and certainly publicly if there was ever need to do that. So no, yeah, unbelievable experience that I learned lots from in terms of dealing with other human beings as opposed to just being involved in football.
Yeah, because I think something Lammy always talks about is that relationship between the manager and the staff and how important that is. And I think it's something that we've touched on quite a lot, isn't it, Lammy?
Yeah, definitely. I think when you feel empowered in that way, that you are an extension of the manager, and when you're talking to a player, you're essentially representing the manager, and that your words have got the same power as him. It's really, really important that players and staff understand that. Also, that part of the manager understanding that you're the specialist in this area, and not him, and you're here because you're better at that particular role than he is a really, really fundamental part of any successful backroom staff, backroom team, I think.
Yeah. So when you talk about the standards that Sir Alex Ferguson sets, and how did they sort of shape your team and your department? Was it just because of that clarity that he gave you to say, you do what you need to do?
Yeah, it was just that clarity. Everybody knew where they stood. You knew the door was always open. You knew you'd have an honest conversation if it was ever needed. Simple things, the timekeeping, dress standards. We always wore club suits to games, things like that. Just made you feel $1 million. And I think sometimes, it did give the team a bit of an advantage when they did that, turning up to the stadium and seeing the opposition coming in all sorts of gear, and we were in club suits. And I wasn't always popular with players, but just those things rubbed off on everybody, that not to let those standards drop. Obviously a high work ethic, but without being present all the time. He didn't like presenteeism. He did tell me off once to say the sports science lads are working way too late into the evening. When
Really?
the data side of things came in, there was a lot of number crunching to do. He said, I want them fresh. I want them making quality judgments on the training pitch in the morning.
Brilliant.
So that work hard, but equally not play hard, but use your leisure time effectively to switch off, recharge. And he was actually the best at that. After games, you'd see him on the train on the way back. Once we got out of the stadium, he was with Lady Kathy on the way back, and the grandkids and stuff, reading books, politics, history, everything, switched off. And then the next morning he was back on it, going through the game with the players. So it was that ability to switch off at the right times, to devote all your energies to the job in hand at the right times as well.
One of the things that always stood out to me about Sir Alex was not just that he held these high principles and he was relentlessly driven, but he was also an innovator on the football field, and he refreshed his squads and he bought players. And there was I was obviously working within football at the time, and there was, whether it was, what are Man United doing? That was the standard. What are Man United doing? And there was that innovation of the lab, the Man United lab that came in. Was it an expectation from Sir Alex on you, or did you feel an expectation that you did have to be looking at the next thing and to drive innovation and to look at new technologies or new ways of winning?
Yeah, that was something he instilled in all of us, to always be looking ahead. Obviously, he was doing it on the player regeneration side as well, but he empowered myself to do that on the medical side. Tony Strudwick was brought in after Volta de Salvo to do that, and Tony's brainchild was the lab. I mean, he expanded his staff with sports scientists who had a really good reputation in the game. So we were continually trying to be ahead of it, and we didn't shout about it either. I think we kept things under wraps, so it always was a little bit of a mystery, I think, at other clubs to say, what are Man United doing? How do we find out? We can't get round and have a look and see. So we weren't sort of trying to show people around as a museum. We were just trying to quietly get on with things. And sometimes things didn't work, so we didn't want to showcase things that perhaps weren't working for us, but we do our own pseudoscience as well as some of our formal science. When we started to employ interns who'd look at the GPS data, come up with meaningful and valid insights out of that we gained the competitive advantage from for a while before it was published in common knowledge. So we were always trying to just stay a step ahead of the competition, which is what every club's trying to do constantly.
Did he buy into that data quickly, or did it take a while for him to come round?
No, he was very intuitive, obviously, in the way he managed. And obviously, a coach's eye is still the most important thing for me. The data just helps to sometimes explain or inform certain things, or helps you to look at it and analyse it in a bit more depth. But certainly all the managers I've worked with have had a great eye. Some were very data-driven, some didn't like data at all. But their eye was the most important thing. And I was never going to argue back with data to say, no, you're seeing it wrong, no chance. But equally, sometimes if they asked a question of me, why is so-and-so not at it? Or we could use the data alongside our own intuition from our own fields to try and work out and present a reasoned answer why. But more importantly, to try and find a solution to correct it and put it right.
Yeah. The last thing I want to ask about Sir Alex Ferguson is, did you ever clash with him? And when I mean clash with him, it's if you've got a player that you don't think is ready to play a game and you've got a big game, how would you approach that, and how did that go, if it happened?
It never happened. I had one very brief moment earlier on in my career when Nemanja Vidic sustained a head injury, I think playing Wigan. at home, and it was one we didn't spot straight away. Actually, I think he'd gone up for a corner and then had a knock on the head, and then but 10 minutes later was staggering around, so he had to come off. So for me, no, in that situation, the player's got to come off.
Yeah.
And I have to go and say the manu's coming off. I think we gone 1-0 down as well, so it wasn't a great time, to take one of your two centre halves off. But it wasn't a clash at all. It was just a brief moment of frustration, but then absolutely backed me completely afterwards with the player and publicly as well. So no, never any clashes, never any disputes of that nature. And yeah, I'm really racking my brains now. I can't think of anything. And I know I've went to him many times with some last minute surprises, even on match day, which is obviously the dreaded walk up to the office when the team sheet's done, if you like. It's not in, but it's done. The players have gone home. The squad's been told who's travelling, who's not travelling. And I've gone and said, player X has just come to me with a bit of a hamstring tweak. I don't think, he's ready to play, or there's a big risk to it tomorrow. You'd get a quick show of frustration, which is natural, but then he would have plan B, C, D, and E probably all ready to go. So
that must have been an absolute blessing for you to know.
Me, great, because I was never fearful or in trepidation of knocking on the door or saying what I thought needed to be said. So yeah, I think he'd already almost thought of things that could happen before they happened.
Yeah.
Brilliant. Yeah, just shows you the quality, and that's why he was one of the best managers in world football, wasn't it? So it's totally understandable.
It's no surprise that team at that time was so successful based on that culture and that environment for everyone to be in.
Yeah, definitely. So we're going to have to talk about, arguably, I mean, this podcast is about fitness. It's about gaining the extra 1%. It's about what goes on behind the scenes. We're going to have to speak about Cristiano Ronaldo. Because you have seen him twice now. You saw him at the infancy of his career when he first joined Manchester United. I think you joined a couple of years after he joined, so you'd have seen him at his. I'd say I remember playing against him, and I tell a lot of people this story. I played against him at Anfield when he first joined, and he was this scrawny player who had incredible feet, great ability. Didn't quite have that finished article at that time, but I think he was about 18 or 19 when he was playing. And then I went to Old Trafford when I signed for Blackburn 2 years later, and he absolutely terrorised me. His quads had doubled in size. His arms had doubled in size. His neck had got bigger. And I'm thinking, what have they done? This must have been part of the lab. So I'm thinking, what have you done to him, Doc? How did you create that?
It was just before the lab, actually. His work with that started before I arrived, or Struds in the sports science team, and then hopefully we sort of added to that afterwards. But he'd been working hard in the gym. There was a good gym culture at Man United when I took over, which wasn't the same in all clubs. I think there was a hardcore of players who loved the gym. They loved to do shift some weights.
Was that the Mick Clegg kind of?
That's it. Yeah. So the Mick Clegg Senior. Yeah. So Mick was there. He really invested a lot of time in players that were willing to work hard, and Cristiano was one of them. And they struck up a great rapport. So he spent a lot of hours in the gym, getting stronger, but functionally stronger, not just bulking up. It was functional strength, not just bodybuilding for the sake of it. But as you say, when he arrived in the Premier League, he perhaps didn't have the physical presence to be able to withstand tough tackling fullbacks like you. So he had to improve that as well as developing his speed and his power and his explosivity and all those things that made him stand out. And then when he was very close with Carlos Queiroz. Obviously, he was the assistant manager.
Yeah.
Walter de Salva was there just before Strud. So he had good people around him, experienced football people who helped him develop. He invested the time in it. And then when Struds and the lab concept developed, Cristiano bought into that as well. And at that time, he didn't really have an entourage outside a personal team. He got most of his input from the club and the national team, doctor and medical staff. players at that time were often very close, particularly those
Yeah.
abroad, with their national team docs and physio. So we had to strike up a good relationship with those.
I was going to say that was because that was going to be my question was it a Manchester United culture that he bought into, or was there an element where he used outside people as well?
I think it was a little bit of both, but I think he really bought into the Man United culture at the time. From what I saw, by the time I arrived, he was in the gym. He was working with McClegg a lot, and then obviously had Volta and Carlos to guide him on the field. And then with the national team, we were in regular contact with them. Obviously, just in terms of what he did when he was with the national team, he never missed an international window. As you know, he was still is from what I see. Doesn't want to miss any game for either club or country. So the two sort of dovetail quite nicely.
So when he returned to the football club, did you see anything distinctly different in the way he was, the way he was training, the way he was eating? Was there anything different, or was it just a continuation of what he'd been doing?
Yeah, obviously by then he'd developed himself into a unique specimen in all ways.
Yeah.
So there's no way we were going to change anything that he was doing in that regard. We just needed to make sure that he was Premier League ready again for the role that he was about to play. But the biggest thing I spotted was just his general physique was no different really. Still an absolute specimen. But his nutritional habits were interesting to observe because I think by that time he'd gained so much knowledge. He was really interested and educated in nutrition in particular. I think he has links with the university, or even has set up a nutritional university to sort of help others in that regard, not just himself. And he would he'd not only be picky and choosy about what he ate in the club canteen, he would have the chefs weighing out ingredients to put in the recipes for his meal.
Really?
Telling them how to do this, and he passed that on to players as well. There's players there now who I'm sure have benefited from that year and a half that they spent with him, observing those habits, and he was quite happy to share that with those players. Those that were interested to learn those ways. So for me, that was one thing.
Yeah, I think when you know him as well as anyone. I think when you look from the outside, he seems quite self-obsessed and sort of very me. But what you're saying there is the complete opposite. He wants to teach people. He wants to pass on that information, which is just brilliant to hear, isn't it?
Yeah. He has to be me to be.
Yeah, to a certain degree.
And that's essential. But it wasn't just about him at the expense of everybody else. I'm sure Diogo Dalot, for example, has benefited in terms of his physical robustness now that I see in the last couple of seasons. He's been virtually an ever present.
Yeah.
I'm sure he learned a lot from being around Cristiano at the club, as well as national team. But in the club day to day, I could see that he was literally sort of hanging off nearly every word he said to try and learn those habits. And I'm sure he's put them into practice in his life, inside the club and at home.
Lammy, how do you think you'd have got on with the fat testing on Cristiano?
I think I'd have given that task to one of the interns and said, "You can go make." I don't think I'd be able to find anything. I mean, he is without doubt, when you look at the longevity of his career and his level of professionalism, and the lengths that he goes to find that additional edge to maintain his performance levels. He's still performing at the highest levels when we look at Portugal's success through the summer and all of these. And it's interesting that you do get served these things on those of us who use social media. There was something popped up the other day of Cristiano Ronaldo's sleeping habits and his micro sleeps and how he prepares himself through the day. And if you're a young player and you want to look at how you should live your life and how your lifestyle affects your ability to be a top player, then there's no better role model. Have a look at what he does, and perhaps you won't be able to achieve those levels and that level of obsession of maintaining those performance levels for that length of time. But certainly, it's a great insight into what it takes to be a player for that length of time.
Doc, I know this will sound like a bit of a silly question because of the success that he's gone on to have. Is he the most dedicated you've seen, or has there been others that have been equally dedicated but just haven't reached the heights that Cristiano's reached?
Yeah, I've seen others invest similar amounts of time into their lifestyle, their training, and their recovery practices. Just going back very quickly to Cristiano. First time round, he was a hard trainer, in the team sessions, but would train afterwards, practicing free kicks, until he got them right. He'd often be the last in off the pitch. Second time round, obviously, he was a lot older, so his training volume, if you like, wasn't as high as it was in the early days, but his volume of recovery investment was massive. And that started, the minute he came off the training pitch or the minute after the final whistle. He's spending ages recovering in many different ways, using as many modalities as he can, but all with a structure and a process in his own mind. And into match day +1, he would continue to do that so that he could go again for the next thing. So there's players who perhaps invested the time, but maybe not in any real structured or as structured and ordered fashion that he did. Sometimes a lot of things isn't always the best. It's about doing it in the right order and at the right time.
Yeah.
And he'd really developed that over the years between when I first dealt with him and when I came across him again.
So how do you think he got the best of that structure then? Just trial and error, or working with the best people?
I think working with the best people, he sought out the best people, I'm sure, outside of the club environment, and he probably found people that he trusted, educated people, educated himself.
Yeah.
He understood the science behind it as well. It wasn't just, I'm asking you what's the best. He
Tell me why.
tell me why, and he would often know why and why not as well.
Really?
Yeah. So
Yeah.
very educated man. Yeah.
I think that's really important in terms of player preparation, so that they're not just mindlessly doing things and throwing enough mud at the at recovery and hope that some of it sticks. When you inform players and when you're educating them, and you're telling them why they're doing and when they should do this.
Mhm.
We talked about ice baths, when you should do them, when you perhaps shouldn't do them. I think then you get you get a great level of buy-in from players. And that then becomes more effective. Then we see the results of that in the game on Saturday.
Yeah, definitely. No, agreed. So, moving away from Manchester United, I bumped into you a couple of years ago now at Euston Station, and you actually told me that you were moving on from Manchester United and that you were going to go to the PGMO. I keep on saying, I want to say PGMOL because I'm so used to saying it, but it's dropped the L now.
Yeah.
What inspired you to make the transition and to leave Manchester United and to go and look after the referees, and what is your role now, if you can elaborate on that a little bit?
Firstly, I wasn't really looking to leave. I just saw the job advert, and it quite excited me really. And a lot of things sort of arrived at once. I'd reached a certain age. I'd been in football at the sharp end for quite a long time, and for me, I was always one to be at the front line. I wanted to be on the bench. I'm proud to say I did over 1,000 consecutive first team games for Man United.
Wow.
Including off-season friendlies and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So whilst I could have perhaps taken a step back or a step upstairs and taken on a sort of a department directorship role, I don't think I could have done that and then allowed somebody else to be on the bench and do stuff. I'd have found that quite hard. And sometimes then you've got two voices, mixed messages. I know it works in some clubs, but for me, that's something I couldn't really do. I saw the job advertised and it was quite exciting because it was part of a new initiative called the Elite Referee Development Plan, which was like the Elite Player Performance Plan that had occurred 10 years before that to drive standards up in academies. And it was a new role. It was a bit of an open book, really, a bit of a blank sheet to develop the performance support services for not just the elite referees, but all those operating in the professional game in England, men's and women's game.
Yeah.
So that encompassed sports science, physical performance, strength and conditioning, nutrition, psychology, insights and analysis, and medical. So it was much more of a strategic role where I thought, I'm still involved in football here. I can take a step back. I'm not necessarily going to be responsible for operational delivery day to day, but I can use my experience that I've gained from my career in football to maybe bring that to a group that is perhaps in need of it now. So moving away from fine margins to some initial bigger margins, but now hopefully we're getting more towards the fine margin end after a few years of investment and work from my staff.
So what in that transition, what what innovations did you take from working with players in a Premier League environment into that new role?
Yeah. Well, there's huge challenges to begin with because match officials are all home based. There's no performance centre. There's the VAR hub at Stockley Park, which is an operational centre to deliver VAR. And at the time when I joined, they weren't in the new hub; they were in the old one, which was really more of a TV type studio rather than a performance centre. So they had that. They did regional camps either out of St George's Park or Loughborough, and that's moved around various locations over the years. And they had a very small support staff, really, sort of three sports scientists, a couple of psychologists, a team of analysts, which was quite well developed because, as you can imagine, with refereeing, it's quite clip heavy and performance review based on clips and observation at matches. But there wasn't really a support team that they could tap into day to day. Everything was still very much remote. And there wasn't a medical team, believe it or not. There was no medical team whatsoever. There was no physio, no doctor. The sports scientists had to sort of be the gatekeeper and then refer to external medical services. So
did you know that before going into the role, or did this shock you when you went in?
This was something I found out during the pre-interview process, if you like, and that allowed me to develop a plan, if you like, a plan of action to present to PGMO, because I thought this job would probably go to a sports scientist. Usually those performance support director roles would go to sports scientists or physios, but
those sports scientists get everywhere, Doc. They get everywhere.
It was possibly one of the USPs that I had to sort of get this job, was because of that gap in medical. So I could bring in my medical expertise and governance background to hopefully set up some initial good health and safety practices. So emergency care at training camps. We've put some health screening in place, but athletic health screening that's looking at cardiac risk, that type of thing that players have as standard. So there was quite a few quick wins based upon things that were now fully established as part of the EPPP investment that went into clubs. We had some extra funding from the stakeholders, so largely from Premier League, but also contributions from the EFL, the FA, and Women's Super League, as it was at the time, to develop services, but in return for impact from that investment. And we're just about to enter the fourth and final season of that program before we decide on where we go from 26-27 season onwards with the support package. So it was a nice project for me to oversee, do, and so just transfer some of those practices that have become ingrained in certainly Premier League clubs and Championship clubs over the last 10 years.
So, Lammy, how's it look now for the Referees Association compared to a Premier League team or a Championship team? What's how close are you to getting to that?
Yeah, we still don't have a base, and I don't think we ever will have a base. I think that's been mooted in the past, but I think one of the things that makes PGMO unique is the diversity of the workforce in terms of where they're from. I think the regionality brings different skills to the workplace. They do an awful lot of travelling anyway, so you're not going to get all the top refs moving to a single training base, for example, in the Midlands.
No,
just because that's not going to fit with family culture, everything else, and also, there's integrity issues to be mindful of. That certain refs can't officiate in certain games because of where they're from or allegiances they may have had in the past with teams. Some did play the game in the past, so at lower levels. So we've got to try and sort of implement a club type model in terms of the practices, but through a remote system. So I've just used that investment to sort of direct and help build on services that were beginning to be put in place anyway by the existing team. So I think there were 8 and 9 sort of regional strength and conditioning bases where the top match officials could drop into for a couple of sessions a week of S&C. But now we've sort of expanded that too. I think we're shortly going to be up to 22, 23 regional centres around the country that are all of a similar standard. So we use the high level sports universities that Lammy will be aware of, Loughborough, John Moores, UCLan, Leeds Beckett, Portsmouth, all those, Bath. So we know there's high quality staff who can deliver for us as part of a centrally driven model that's led by my staff, and then my staff get some hands-on practitioner time at the national camps that we have every 3 to 4 weeks in each of the main officiating groups. Currently those are held at Loughborough, so but we do flip sometimes between there, Warwick and St George's Park. And so my staff are, I think they possibly get a bit frustrated they don't get the same hands-on time that you'd be used to, I mean, which must be hard for them because they want to deliver, they want to oversee somebody day to day, but they're doing a lot of this remotely through phone calls, Teams calls, technology now that we use to monitor them, and placing that trust in other practitioners to deliver and oversee on their behalf.
So just could you just expand on how that works then? Is it your team that's kind of writing the programs and it's being delivered by other people? Or in some instances the referee's doing it perhaps without input from a practitioner? And then how's that being monitored, and what are the feedback loops that you've got in place so that you've got, what these referees are doing?
Yeah. So my team generally program both the strength and conditioning sessions and which are based obviously on all the usual parameters now that we've done through systematic screening and profiling over the past couple of years with all the standard type sports science equipment. So we now have a much better idea of the physical attributes of each of the employed match officials, in particular those that are operating in the Premier League, Championship, Women's Super League. And from that, they will base their S&C programs with regard to performance optimization, injury prevention, and some general work-ons. The on-field training is programmed again by our physical performance team, and that's periodized around the match appointments. So that's quite a task in itself with big numbers, lots of games being covered. There's obviously, for a referee, you could be in the middle, you could be fourth, where you might have to come on. It does happen occasionally. And that fourth might be sometimes the day after an on-field. So you've got to try and manage that, or the top ones are also in the VAR chair as well. So they might be doing that day before a game. In between that, there's a lot of travel that gets in the way of actually being able to do the training, and then access to facilities or quality facilities to do your on-field work. And some are able to access high-level facilities at the regional centres. Others are not so fortunate, and they may be on the road and might have to find somewhere, or we may have to direct them to somewhere. So it's very different to a player situation. But I think we're getting better at it, and we monitor that now using GPS, which was in use before I came in, but we've changed to a system now that is a lot more responsive, so they can see their data straight away. My team can feed back on it much more quickly than they could do before, and therefore amend programs according to what's the work outputs that have been delivered or circumstances that have got in the way of the training. A delayed flight from a European game, or they get to Eastern Europe or something, and it's covered in 6 inches of snow, and they've got a high intensity running session to do. So we have to flip that around to what have you got in the hotel? What's there? How can we can we modify it? So there's a lot of moving parts that
Right.
have to be monitored and delivered remotely, and a lot of that's down to good communication between the match official and their programming sports scientist.
So just moving it on a little bit then. So we're going to sort of compare referees or officials with the players, and just in practical terms, the physical demands that are on referees. Just where are they at compared to Premier League players, and what's the little bit of a difference between the two?
Yeah, it's the gap is getting closer, I think, and you've got to remember we're dealing with a generally older demographic in match officials. The roles are very different to playing, so they're not mini players. I think at times I'm probably beating a drum that I don't want to come across as I've been dealing with players and this is what you need to be. I do appreciate they have different roles, different and different roles even in terms of referee and assistant, very different movement patterns, outputs that are needed, and they've also got to concentrate, make decisions, and as you know from the comms now on match officials mic'd up, that they're constantly talking.
Yeah,
which amazed me how much they actually talk whilst they're exercising at high level and concentrating. So, in terms of speeds, for example, top speeds, they're not going to reach the levels that some of the quickest Premier League players will do, like an Anthony Olange, I work with, and he's always up at the top, and Mickey van der Ven. But they need to be not too far off that if an event happens in a game that requires that moment, and it might only be once or twice a season, where they've got to do a box-to-box run. And the way the game's changed, it's constantly changing, as you know, playing out from the back.
Yeah.
We have to be close to the action where the keeper's got it. Now, all of a sudden, there's a transition, and they've got to be 70, 80 metres up the field to be able to make a key decision about a penalty or a denial of an obvious goal-scoring opportunity, that type of things. Requirements of the match officials are changing, particularly the referees. They need the full repertoire really in the locker. They need that sort of box-to-box endurance or intermittent endurance. They need to be able to sprint and move sharply around the box at times to get the right angles to make the correct decisions. They've got to anticipate where that's going to be. They've got to run backwards, which players don't generally do.
No, very true. People will say I did that naturally, Doc. I seen you laughing then, so I thought I'll get in before you say it.
There's a lot more backward running for referees. Scanning all the time. I know midfield players do that constantly, the scanning, but referees are constantly doing it in a 360 manner. And just to move on to assistants, I don't want it to be all about refs, but assistants, do a lot of sideways running, for example, which generally don't do. They'll do that crabbing movement, where they're having to sort of shuffle sideways to just keep in line with the second rearmost defender. And sometimes they have to go full on sprint from standing start, where they might have been stood on the halfway line for 10 minutes, to a full out sprint on a breakaway on a sort of half turn, looking across the line. So lots of different movement patterns.
Well, I was going to ask that actually, Doc. Do you find in your profiling that there are certain individuals that are better suited to being assistants than being referees, and do you see that role might become specialised?
Yeah, I think the roles are specialised now. If you get to the top levels in football, you have to make a decision now in men's football, certainly, whether you're going to be a referee or an assistant. Mm-hmm. Before you get to sort of national game level. It's more of an issue for many of our female officials who may be referees in women's football and doing AR sometimes in women's football as well, or maybe an AR in national game level. So they can still do dual roles, and that's a big challenge for them. But specialism occurs now anyway, more because of your technical ability, I think, and where your attributes lie in terms of your decision making.
So I thought I was meaning more in terms of the physical attributes as these individuals are coming through the system, that you filter them into referee or assistant based on their physical characteristics.
I think we probably wouldn't do it on physical characteristics, because that for me should be the base level. They should all have the physical attributes, and then the rest of it is about decision making. And referees will have different cognitive attributes to an assistant referee who's constantly analysing, a line, if you like, and can make very quick judgments of people moving past a certain fixed point, whereas referees have got to scan more, they've got to see things, got to anticipate play, they've got to man manage, player manage a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think those attributes probably determine whether they're going to be an assistant or referee more than the physical attributes.
Yeah.
But equally, somebody who's more explosive and maybe better at sprinting is perhaps more suited to being an assistant in the short term, because they might have to do shorter, sharper sprints more often. Although now, as I said, in the middle, that's becoming more and more a part of the game, and certainly the requirement at top level is not so much about intermittent endurance now. It's more about, can you be in the right place at the right time to make the right decision, which needs sharp, quick, explosive movements, and they need to be able to stop quickly and change direction without getting injured, as you know, and that's obviously one of the bigger things in terms of injury causation, isn't it? Deceleration and change of direction rather than necessarily your out-and-out top speed.
Because obviously in the game at the moment, we're seeing a lot of hamstring injuries because of the way the game's evolved. Is there anything that you're spotting at the moment?
Yeah, I think when I first came in, most of the injuries were posterior chain, as we call it, and generally down the lower end. So calves and Achilles issues. And I think that's down to, being on your toes a lot. Sometimes a lot of slow movements in refereeing, which are high demand on the deep calf muscle, as you know. So sometimes it's not the explosive stuff; it's the constant on the move, moving around, is quite high demand. But also, again, older demographic. So you with the best will in the world, your tissues aren't as robust as as you get older.
Yeah.
And as I say, a lot of travel. So there's a lot of travel in slumped positions where you've then suddenly got to get ready and up to speed for a Premier League physical demands after maybe a 3 or 4 hour car journey the night before, sometimes even on the morning of the game. That might have been after a flight back from a midweek appointment in Europe somewhere. So calves and Achilles were a big thing, I think, in my first couple of years. So we've had a big focus on trying to address those. But now we are hopefully pushing some officials more towards higher athletic capacities in terms of speed and explosivity, starting to see a few more hamstrings as well. So simple players. Now, whilst I don't want any injuries, in some ways that shows me that they are developing in those attributes to a degree, and I don't think you'll ever avoid injuries. But I think if we can get the balance right, we'll have robust officials who are capable of those higher demand actions that are needed in the Premier League and similar levels.
When a referee does get injured, what's the process for you then? Because obviously with a player, you've got them in the training ground then, but you've got this decentralized model. How do you manage the injury?
Yeah, we've got a clear reporting process in place now. So I think previously they would generally be under their own call, really. Some referees like to do games. They love doing games. They need to do games more than players do for financial reasons. So they don't like missing opportunities. They don't like, if there's big games coming up where they think they might be in with a chance of a final or something like that, they will want to try and not take themselves out of the frame of that because they only get one chance at those usually. It's unlike players, they can't keep doing them every year. If you're the best ref, you'll get one chance at an FA Cup final.
Yeah.
So for them, it's a huge thing. But now I think we've got a culture whereby they are more open to sharing what's happening with them. Then we've got a medical team in place now that will work closely with the physical performance team to get to the bottom of that. We will hopefully try and resolve the issues in a better way. And we've got a network now of physical therapists associated with the regional centres and equally some private clinics as well. And, some of the top officials do have their own people just like players. So we'll work with people that they have worked with for years who know them very well. And so we're getting a better culture around information sharing, keeping it within the medical team where necessary, informing outside of that with their consent where necessary, so that hopefully we won't be having match officials that are patching themselves up or being patched up to do the next game where they might not be at their physical best, but they could still get through a game because the demands aren't as great, or they can manage themselves within a game. The
Yeah.
experienced ones
Yeah.
know where to be on the field, like your older central midfielders, don't they? Their playing style changes as they get older and they adapt to the latter stages of the career until a point comes where the game starts to pass them by a little bit.
Yeah. Is there a protocol, Doc, where after a game or after a period of games that you've got to give them an extended break or anything along them lines to make sure that they're not fatigued, not only physically but mentally?
Yeah, there's no protocols yet, but it's something we're working on in the background yet. But we need, to use the
More
data
refs
to look
as well.
at that, and we need more refs, and more refs capable of officiating any of the top level games. And there's a lot of factors come into that, as you know. That's about ability, technically, athletic capacity, but also credibility with the clubs, the competitions. This is why the elite referee development program is in place, to have more officials that are capable of refereeing any Premier League game. And I think we're making great strides towards that, and that will certainly, help in terms of getting the proper rest and recuperation in between games. But the best refs are always going to be in demand, like players. They're wanted by UEFA, they're wanted by FIFA. And we want them to represent English football on those stages as well. So
Absolutely, yeah.
because it's
100%.
it's good for the game all round.
How long does the development pathway take from a referee, from an individual deciding, getting up one day and saying for some reason I want to be a referee?
Yeah.
How long does that process? I know it's individual, but roughly, do you have the pathway in place?
Yeah, I think the
What does the
traditional
timescale look like?
yeah, the traditional pathway whereby promotions happen really, or promotion opportunities only happen on an annual basis. So it's at the end of the season, there'd be a merit table, which various factors go into, including club marks, observer marks, that type of thing. I think it could take a minimum of 13, 14, 15 years, to get to the top level. So if you're starting refereeing at age 18, 19, 20, if you like, at a serious level, you're in your mid-30s or early 30s before you're getting near the top levels, which is approaching the end of players' careers. So I think that's why we've looked at a development pathway now that allows for accelerated opportunities for identified refereeing talent that has got physical attributes that we can develop also and build upon to try and accelerate them through a 3-4 year development pathway from their previous level. Those that were recruited into that group initially came from various levels, and some have graduated out of it now for the first time and are, you'll see them on Premier League duty, fourth officials, just getting a taster of being around it and getting used to the environment and seeing what goes on, officiating at championship level on a regular basis. There are others that came in lower levels than that who graduated but came out up officiating at a level higher than what they came in. So still successes. But I think now to get to the top level, you've got to really try and be developing those skills to be able to be exposed to that environment within 3 or 4 years. But those who come through the traditional pathway are still not excluded. There's talent coming in from that pathway as well, and there's merit in both. But we've got to try and get more through the system quickly, but prepared in all aspects. And as I say, you can teach a lot of things physically and cognitively, but a lot of it's just through sheer game time. That's how I learn in football, being exposed to lots and lots of games and situations rather than anything people could teach me or coach me on.
Yeah, understandable. So the officials are in the spotlight an awful lot, and probably more so than ever. With the introduction of VAR, I think the limelight is often on officials now. So from a psychology and a pressure situation, what measures are you putting in place to help the officials?
Yeah, so when I came in, there was a psychology team in place already. The psychology service we had was predominantly performance based, although there was a welfare side to it as well. So it was more about enhancing technical performance and key performance characteristics, we call them, such as, resilience, leadership, communication styles, that type of thing. So I think there's more we can do on the mental health side, and that's a big focus area for me at the moment, as well as adding to the performance psychology side of things. We do have mental health programs both within the organisation as mental health champions, which is comprised, of peers, some senior staff, if you like, who are have an interest, but also some training in providing mental health support if needed. That won't suit everybody, and I think because the organisation is so big, so diverse, it's impossible for the organisation alone to cater for everybody's needs from a mental health perspective. I've coming in as, if you like, the first medically qualified person into the organisation. I think that was a reassuring thing for some at the time, because they knew I had a code of confidentiality, and so that initially brought me a certain amount of workload that I was happy to take on, even though I said I was moving away from the front line. It was something I was obliged to take on, really, and signpost where necessary through my existing networks and new networks I've developed. So I think that's been one addition. Bringing doctors into the organisation on a consultancy basis, that's another route. We have a rehab performance coach now who's a clinical physiotherapist.
Okay.
Who also has a code of confidentiality who can signpost. So we have a number of routes now whereby match officials can seek help. There are employee assistance programs in place for anybody employed at PGMO, but I think we do need to take it to the next level now, and that's something I'm currently working on, actually, and hopefully we'll have a few exciting appointments in the months ahead to help me with that task.
Is that all it is then? Is it just getting bodies through the door? It's not a financial issue or anything like that?
No, the finance is there from the referee development plan, and it's more about changing culture as well. Stigma still exists in many areas of society and sport, and particularly, where men are involved, as you know. There's a reluctance sometimes to open up. But so we've got to change that culture. We've got to get rid of any fear of adverse consequence by opening up. And that's just by creating relationships, rapport, demonstrating that opening up isn't going to influence progression opportunities adversely. It's actually going to do the opposite. It's going to help you and help you to be your best, if you like. And it's been interesting actually talking to. I've been going through a recruitment process at the moment and just getting ideas from people I've interviewed. And one candidate said something that really resonated with me, that well-being and performance are the same thing, really. If somebody's well-being is sorted out and tip-top, then they're likely to perform at their best. So I think that's a good philosophy that I think I'm going to try and embed into the organisation even more than it is so already. But there's a lot of welfare options available through the organisation already. We just want to make that more accessible and more available to the diversity of need that is exists within our organisation.
I was just going to say, I thought you were going to ask something on Lammy. It was interesting. There was a big sort of pylon on Michael Oliver last year, where I can't remember the game where he made the was it the Miles Lewis Skelly where he got sent off, and there was another decision where he got something and it was quite controversial. Is there ever a point where you just think, I'm going to call him straight after the game and make sure that he's okay, or do you let it breathe a little bit? Because I only asked this question because I was working on Ref Watch last year and I spoke to Dermot Gallagher and he said, I think it's hit him a little bit, and I ended up messaging him myself, just saying, like, you've done an incredible job, and one mistake. Listen, as footballers, we make 20 or 30 mistakes a game. Sometimes we get away with it because we're backed up by someone else. It's not the case if you're a goalkeeper quite often, but for a referee to make one mistake, it can change, I'm sure, the mental health of them for a long time.
Yeah, and again, everybody's different. Some are very resilient to that, some are less so. I don't think there's one hard and fast protocol that's in place, but it's something we may need to actually work on. But there are always people in the organisation who will be in contact with that match official anyway. So from Howard at the top to their coach, to the psychologist they may be working with internally or externally, to myself, sometimes to some of the colleagues that I work with closely who are not involved in judging them, in terms of their performance. So sometimes it can come from a lot of people. The one thing I do worry about is that nobody calls because everybody thinks somebody else is doing it. And that's something I think we need to perhaps just iron out without it becoming a formal protocol, because approaching one official in one way will not suit others in another way because of their personalities, characters. And sometimes, you might feel a compulsion to get on the phone straight away or drop a text, but then that might be the last thing they want when they've just put it to bed and got their head around it, having spoken to family at home or, one of their coaches or management staff. So it's a tricky one to navigate. But for me, the big fear is that nobody gets in touch, and that can't happen, I think.
I was going to ask Doc just on that. The scrutiny that referees are under now is incredible, from the media and various other sources. So in your get-togethers, do you try and sort of preempt that a little bit? I know you've said there isn't a one-size-fits-all sort of approach to this, but is there a place for you're going to be in the newspapers, you're going to be on television, you are going to make mistakes. These are some of the things that you can do to avoid the burden of that.
Yeah. There's training around that, if you like, that gets delivered at training camps through our psych team, and also through our media and communications team, which is another area that has expanded as part of the ARDP. We brought in a new communications officer. That department's expanded. There's been a lot of media engagement that I know Stephen's probably been part of before, part of humanising the officials so that there's greater understanding of match officiating, the demands of it, the people behind it, but equally it introduces the match officials as well to the media a lot more, and the people that are likely to be having an opinion on a decision. We know that without decisions and opinions there'll be nothing to put on TV anyway. So
very true.
But I think there's quite a lot happening already, but again, I think certain individuals will need more input in terms of individual coaching, and they can get that through various sources. We have some professional skills coaches now that work with the Premier League referees, and they will have a small group that they will deal with, and some of the skills coaches there have got a psychology background. It may not be in sports psychology, it might be in business psychology or military psychology or something like that. So there's a number of avenues that can be utilised, but we just need to make sure that everybody's got the avenue that is right for them at a particular time. Well, that's a big challenge.
Yeah, very true. Doc, where do you see referees, sports science and medical care evolving over the next few years?
Right, that depends a bit on the investment, obviously, and what happens next year. And we are making business cases to the various competitions to sort of highlight the successes that we've had or the impact that we're having through the Elite Referee Development Program, and to try and get a new business as usual investment that will enable us to support match officials as they need to be supported. I would personally like to see a number of dedicated centres, if you like, that are our bricks and mortar. I don't think this is going to happen in the immediate future, but it's a vision, if you like, where we could have a bit more like the hub at Stockley Park is. It's developing all the time. It's not only a VAR delivery centre, it's now a VAR training centre. There's a physical performance gym in there. There's therapy areas. So we perhaps need some more of those at more accessible locations around the country, because even getting the top officials down there every few weeks to do VAR training and VAR duty is another trip to London from somebody like Michael from the far northeast, or all those based up north. It's more miles, which is in itself taxing, tiring. So I'd like to see more of those where we had dedicated staff operating out of them, working to a PGMO philosophy and process whereby we could get rapid access to diagnostics, screening on the medical side, injury prevention, injury assessment and management that's with our staff, not just relying on the network of practitioners that we've put in place who are employed by somebody else.
Doc, you've had an absolutely incredible career, and it's one that's obviously carried on now into the officiating. I'm absolutely delighted for you to see you carrying on at such a high level. I think from my point of view, I'd just like to say a massive thank you for coming on and sort of giving us a little bit of an insight into your career and what you've done. But you are our first guest as well on Straining the Game. But it was one, honestly, me and Lammy, weren't we? We were so excited to get you on, Doc, because what you've done in the game is just incredible. And what we wanted to do was give that level of detail behind the scenes as to what someone like yourself does.
Thanks for the invitation, Steve. I didn't know I was the very first one, but all I will say is I've been very fortunate wherever I've been to work with top level people. And I mean human beings as well as experts in their field, whether that be managers, coaches, players, performance support staff. And I've learned a lot off them in many ways about their fields so that I can understand their fields, speak their language, and hopefully I've imparted a bit of my field onto them so that they could understand some of my terminology and processes in return. But no, I've been really lucky. And as I said, that all started way back at Marine and then back at Liverpool Academy when I first met yourself. So
yeah, it's
opened a lot of doors, but doors that I hopefully was equipped to go through and give it a good go, if you know what I mean. And very lucky man to have had the career I've had so far, and I'm really enjoying what I'm doing now. There's more challenges ahead. As I say, it's a side of football that I was ashamed to say I didn't understand until I stepped through the door of PGMO. You saw the refs turn up every week and never gave a thought about what they'd been doing to be out there. So,
now, Doc, for me, I think you've given us some incredible insights into the work that you're doing with referees, and I hope that the listeners and the viewers to this podcast, it's put to bed any misconceptions they might have about how difficult it is to be an official and how hard they work, not just on match day, but in between, and the challenges they face. So thank you very much for that. Really, really, really insightful.
Brilliant. So that has been another episode of Straining the Game. Please follow us on social media. We are on YouTube as well. If you can like and subscribe, that would be much appreciated. And on next week's show, we also have another couple of special guests where we will be talking about nutrition. So please subscribe and follow us for that episode. Follow us on social media and YouTube at Strain on the Game. Subscribe, like, and follow.